All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for coming along on your Saturday to this. I'm Robbie. I'm one of the personal trainers here at Les Mills Howick. Today, we're going to be going over the first of 3 workshops that we're going to be holding over the month of July. This first one will be about the rib cage and air pressure and how that influences the movement of our spine. And then in 2 weeks' time, Phil, our PT manager, will be going over the pelvis and the floor beneath us and how we interact with the floor and what influence that has on our spine. And then 2 weeks after that, we're going to go through the third and final one, where we'll be going through interventions and little strategies and things that you can put into place throughout your day or in your workouts to mitigate, eliminate, and just ease some tension that you may experience with back pain. So I'm assuming that everyone here either experiences back pain currently, or back pain is something that you've had in the past, or it may be something that causes you each day to be a bit hesitant on certain movements or certain exercises. So that's quite familiar to me. It wasn't that long ago where each day I was in a lot of pain. It would hinder my day. It would create a lot of fatigue with the constant chronic tension that I would feel, not just my back, but throughout the rest of my body. And it was things that would start to interfere with my training. I used to do a lot of bodybuilding, and I couldn't progress any further because that I wouldn't be able to push through the pain or anything like that. Since then, I've been a personal trainer for 11 years now. And throughout that time, as I said, I started with bodybuilding, and I would train all my clients like that because that's all I really knew how to do. And so along with myself experiencing discomfort, I would notice that they would experience discomfort as well. So as I was trying to address my own things, my own issues going on, I would then try to help them with the more common things that most people do would be foam rolling and stretching, going to see a specialist. In my experience with going to see people, I would always be told I've got a weak core, weak glutes. So then I would strengthen my core, strengthen my glutes, to little to no sort of return from that. Then one year I went to Los Angeles. My big vision for it was go down to Gold's Gym, train amongst Arnold Schwarzenegger and all the other big bodybuilders down there. And unfortunately, the 13-hour flight basically left me in so much pain. My back had seized up, and I had sciatica down both legs. So basically, I didn't want to go to the gym. The first thing I did was go to the accommodation, roll around on the floor, and try to get some sort of relief. Then while I was there, I got recommended to go see a chiropractor, where the very first thing that he did was do my x-ray. So that's what we see here. That's just me standing, and it really brought some light to some issues that were going on to me. They pointed out the compression that I had on this right side, which was causing slight scoliosis, and a pelvis that was hiked on the right side and then twisted to the right side. So essentially, I would be standing like this and I wouldn't even know. So that led me to really question, why has this happened? How does the human body move? And what can we do about it? So since then, I really upskilled myself. I trial and error on a lot of things. But then that led me to Postural Restoration Institute, which is PRI, which is a company in America where they train physiotherapists, chiropractors, dentists, and all sorts of specialists around human movement, how we move, and why we move the way that we move. A big focus for them is our sensory system, or our nervous system. What we perceive, how we perceive our environment and interact with our environment is how we're going to move, or how much range of motion we have through our joints. Because it's all about safety for the brain. Then on top of that, they talk about the body, or at least the torso, being an air pressure system. When we breathe in, we expand, and when we exhale, we compress. Or at least that's what should be happening. Since then, I've upskilled myself continuously with this, applied things, trial and error again, and I've got to a point now where I can perform at levels that I've never thought was possible. I can sprint at high velocities where walking for a short distance would be an issue for me. And my training has never been better, and I never really think about, never think about my back at all. Any movements I do, it doesn't even cross my mind whatsoever. So these are things that I've passed on to my clients, and I've now taught them what I've learned through PRI and other strategies. When we look at the spine, sorry, that shouldn't have music. When we look at the spine, it should be the most mobile and fluid portion of our body. We should be able to flex, extend, side bend, rotate, all without hesitation. But most people, unfortunately, can't do anything like that. Most things like that. They'll either have limitations in one or the other. And there's one thing here that really makes all of this possible. I really wish that would stop. Is the rib cage right here in the middle. If we have a mobile rib cage, we have a mobile spine. With the rib cage, there's one thing underneath that will allow the rib cage to move, and that is our breathing mechanics. Our guts, even if our guts don't move, then our ribs don't move. We can't pressurize our torso very well. When we look at our internal organs, they play a part in how we move. We are asymmetrical on the inside, and for some people, those asymmetries can start to be expressed on the outside. So a big one being our diaphragms, where we have two diaphragms. This is our right diaphragm and our left diaphragm. Our right diaphragm is roughly twice the size of our left diaphragm, and that matters. With that size, it tends to get a little bit more air than our left diaphragm. We've also got our liver that is placed right on the top of this right diaphragm, which helps it maintain this dome shape. And if the diaphragm has a dome shape, it will get more air to it. When this diaphragm can take over for people, it can create imbalances throughout the spine, throughout the pelvis, and throughout the rib cage. So it can affect everything from our shoulder position, our neck position, how we turn our head, how we move our pelvis. When we breathe in, our diaphragm should ascend, and descend. When we exhale, it should be able to come back up. Just like in this image here, we get expansion throughout our rib cage in all areas, and then we get compression throughout our rib cage when we exhale. This is the one thing that will help us create intra-abdominal pressure, and it will affect the way that we organize our spine, mainly how we organize our pelvis and our rib cage. Most people are in this position here as opposed to this posture here. This posture or position on the left-hand side is what is called a state of inhalation, or a state or overly extended posture. So these people over here have never really experienced the ability of emptying their lungs fully. When we empty our lungs, our ribs come all the way down and our pelvis starts to come back, along with the hamstrings, but that's what Phil will be talking about, pelvis and below, in a couple of weeks' time. When we don't have this posture here, this stacked ribcage and pelvis, we don't have any intra-abdominal pressure. We can't pressurize ourselves. So what that happens down in the pelvis with that is our pelvis dumps forward and sits here like this, Already when that happens, that compresses our lumbar spine is one thing. When we're in this position, this stacked position, we have a lot of rotational components available to us. When we move around, we should be able to rotate from every joint. But when we're stuck in extension, we lose rotation throughout our pelvis and throughout our spine. If the pelvis can't do the rotation that it needs to be able to do, it'll start to move as one unit. And when it moves as one unit, it finds rotation elsewhere, and that is at the lumbar spine, the lower back. So if you're walking around and that's a continuous thing that's happening, that's going to create irritation through here. Even though the lumbar spine is a very mobile and flexible joint, its job isn't to be relied on to solely be used for rotation or used as your gait as you walk around. Here's a couple of examples of what can happen if we're in that extended posture here, where we're full of air, our rib cage is flared, our pelvis is dumped forward. When we breathe in, air is going to go in one direction, and that is usually forward. So a squat, which is basically what you do every day with sitting down, standing up. If we do a squat in the gym in our workouts, and we put a bar on our back, that makes it even harder to be able to maintain a low rib cage and a pelvis in a neutral position. So we force ourselves in an overly extended posture even more and more. So when that happens, and then we try to move, we've lost the ability to start to flex through our spine. We've lost the ability to rotate the joints that we need. So when we go through a squat, the pelvis should be able to start from a state of external rotation. We get down to about midway, and we go through internal rotation, and then we go back to external rotation. If we're in this position here, we're in a forward position, and then as we come down, we try to come into this closed off internal rotation position, but we can't because we're already forward, we're already there, we have no more room to go, so then we get stuck. So that might be quite a familiar position for some people. We get stuck there, roughly above 90 degrees. And if we do have a weight on our back, that can force us to come lower, but we're usually going to find the movement not in our pelvis, but we'll find the movement through our lumbar spine, where we might get some rounding to find that extra room. Whereas here on the right-hand side, we're starting off in a more stacked position. Yes, we've got the bar now is in front of us, either in a front wrap position or hold anything like this, but that is a great way to learn how to create a stacked position instead of going straight to a back squat. That's something you can work towards. From here, working on an exhale, getting all the air out. Then from that position, we're able to inhale. Air can start to come back into our ribs and up into our rib cage. From there, we're expanded. We've decompressed our spine, and we've got space where we can move through. Then from there, that's something you can work through all the way down into a past 90-degree squat, or again, sitting. We're not compensating when we sit, when we don't have compression throughout our spine. The same thing goes for a deadlift or a hinge. If you're bending over to pick something up, it's the exact same thing. If we start off in this very tall posture, we've locked everything up, we've breathed in, all the air goes forward, and then we get stuck again just above 90 degrees. And then here, if I wanted to go lower, I had to collapse my spine in order to get any lower, because I just don't have that room or that space available to me. As opposed again to here, starting off more neutral, ribs are down, I can expand, create intra-abdominal pressure, and then move through because my joints are now moving. Now, the difference between where people would usually go to core strength is people will start to brace down, but then when we're in a brace position, it's harder for our breathing mechanics to operate. When we're here, our diaphragms have limit. When we brace down, think of like a plank or any sort of really core exercise that provides you to be stable and still and brace as hard as you can. Our diaphragm locks down, and then our breathing becomes very short and shallow, and it's very hard to expand in that position. Strengthening the core isn't necessarily the wrong thing, but it's a step too far. When we look at what the main role of the abdominals is, the main role for the abdominals is respiration. So when we breathe in, our abdominals lengthen, and when we exhale, our abdominals contract and shorten. The main muscles working here, when we breathe in, our intercostals around our rib cage, they all expand, or at least they should expand and lengthen. And then when we exhale, our transverse abdominis, which is what we see here, and the obliques, or our side abs, they push all of the air out, assist with pushing all the air out, and they bring the rib cage down, and they bring the pelvis back. Now, we are going to do a few practical things just to see where your limitations might be in your rib cage. One thing we'll be looking at is the shoulder range of motion. Our shoulder range of motion is dictated by how well our rib cage expands. If we have compression in an area of our rib cage, we're going to have limitation in our shoulder mobility. Now, if we think of that with the spine, and we're in a, say, group fitness class, or we're exercising out there, and we're trying to do a shoulder press, and we don't have this expansion, and we don't have this rotation available through our shoulders. So if I can't get external rotation, I'm going to find it elsewhere by compressing and overly extending my spine. So some of you may have experienced that, overhead pressing or any sort of pressing where you get back pain from there. That tends to be what's going on. So if we have limitation in our shoulder internal rotation, we're going to be closed off at the front of our rib cage. So air can't really come to here or around the sides of the ribs. And then what we see is the shoulder start to roll forward. So if you think of any rowing exercises where the shoulder will roll forward, we get impingements throughout our neck. And what we see for external rotation, if we have limitations here, we have a limitation of expansion at the back of our rib cage. So we're going to test that all now. So if you want to find a spot somewhere, and I'm going to talk you through how to do this test. You're going to be laying on the floor, feet flat on the floor, and elbows out to your side in line with your shoulder. The first one we're going to test is internal rotation. There's one thing to look out for when we do this, which you can't see that well in the bottom here, is when we go through this rotation, if the shoulder comes off of the floor, then we don't have any internal rotation. That doesn't mean you have good rotation, it means you don't have any. So we'll start with both shoulders or elbows out to your side in line with your shoulder. And have your hands in the air. That's it. Then very slowly, you're going to just drop your hands down towards the floor and see where you can feel any sort of impingements, any pain, or if you notice your shoulders lifting off of the floor. Now in the same position, we're going to start off with your hands back up in the air. We're going to check your external rotation, So you're going to slowly let your arms come back, your hands come back. Now, one thing to look out for here is if you notice there's a gap between your lower back and the floor, then you're arching your spine and you're creating external rotation there. So that's false one. So see if you can bring your lower back against the floor and then slowly let your hands come back. Feel out if you notice any pinching or impingements. Okay. So just remember that, because we're going to go over a couple of different things to try to improve expansion at the front of your ribs and then expansion at the back of your ribs. The first one, if everyone's just sitting up for a second, you will be laying back down again. The first one we're going to go through is working on expansion in the back of the rib cage. Even if you found your internal rotation tricky, and that means that you need expansion at the front of the ribs, you still need to learn how to bring your rib cage down and your pelvis back to be able to send air up into the ribs, whether it's back or forward. So everyone will be doing this one. So what we're going to do here, I'll talk to you through it first and then talk again through it. You want to have your both hands up in the air. You're going to exhale fully to feel your ribs come down and your pelvis tilt back. Remember, we're not trying to squeeze the abs first. At the end of your exhalation, you should feel your abdominals kick in a little bit. Try not to squeeze them as hard as you can. Once you're in this position, you're going to breathe in again so air can start coming back. What we're not going to do is breathe in and let the ribs pop back up. We want to try to keep the ribs as low as you can, exhaling all the way. When you breathe in, air should come to the back of the ribs. Then when you exhale again, you're going to reach even further and further and further with your shoulders without letting your head come off the floor. All right, I'll talk you through this all again. When you do that, you may feel pulling throughout the back, your mid-back. You might feel cramping throughout your lower back. That's all quite normal things. Just ease off a little bit. What that tells me is all that muscle tissue has been so short and bound up for a long time, and it's trying to lengthen and trying to lengthen. Okay, so I'll talk you through all of this. We're going to go laying back down in the same position, feet flat on the floor, so knees bent, and both arms right out in front of you. The very first thing you're going to do is exhale all of your air out and feel your rib cage come down and your pelvis tilt back. Try to get every last little bit of air out. At the end of that exhale, slowly breathe in, and you should feel your lower back expand against the floor. You should feel your ribs expand against the floor as air comes into your back. You're going to do this for about 3 minutes. You may not feel it the first few times. You may feel air just come straight back and forward, straight forward. On your following exhales, reach your arms even further and further. So you're really trying to open and spread your shoulder blades out. Maintain that reach as you breathe back in. And exhale and reach further and further. All right, and relax. Cool. Okay. You can all sit up just for a second. That one there will help people create a stack of ribcage and pelvis, but with your arms reached out in front of you, it will also help create the space in your back, in the back of the ribs, which will improve external rotation of the shoulder. What we're going to do now is more for the people who struggled with internal rotation of the shoulder. So the people that found external rotation trickier, you can just keep doing the same thing of reaching out in front. But for the other people, all you're going to do is place both of your hands down by your side. We're going to do exactly the same thing of exhaling to let all your air out, your rib cage come down and pelvis tuck back. Then as you breathe in, your shoulders are going to be slightly retracted and you should start to feel air eventually come to the top of the rib cage. And this one is a bit trickier because with our arms here, it is easier for the ribs to start popping back up. Just do the best that you can with this. If you notice your back lifting off of the floor, that's an indicator that your ribs have started to pop up. Okay, so all go laying back down again. You can do this one if you want. The people who found the external rotation harder, you can keep reaching your arms out in front. So you're going to have your hands placed down by your side. You're going to exhale your air fully out, emptying your lungs. Feel your ribs come down, feel your pelvis back, and retract your shoulders. Slowly breathe in. Try not to let your rib cage lift up. You should feel the top of your ribs expand. Again, this may take a few breaths. It usually doesn't come in the first one. All right, so you're going to stay laying down. You're going to retest your shoulders. So you bring your elbows back out to your side and just slowly move them through internal and external rotation and just see if that feels a little bit better. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Might be a little bit more freedom, a little bit more range. You might still have the same range that you had, but it might feel a little bit smoother. You might feel a little bit less of your shoulder blades lifting off the floor. All right, cool. Take a seat again. That's all the practical stuff done. So these things I do myself before exercise, or at least I try to do this most days just to set my body up a little bit better. And I always do this with clients before training. We may spend about 5, 10, 15 minutes doing this, depending on what that person needs. Because if we go straight to exercise and we've got a collapsed foundation, it makes it so much harder to try to get these areas to expand if we try to, which we can do these sort of thoughts and conscious thoughts of breathing during exercises to expand and create more space. But if we go straight into it, sometimes it can be tricky just to get the desired result that we want. So for example, for a shoulder, if we're trying to improve the internal and external rotation of the shoulder, and we go straight to some banded rotations, if that foundation is still collapsed underneath, we're just going to be encouraging that same function that we've already got. If we can expand it, the shoulder will open up, bring back into a good position, and then we could do those things if that's what we want to do. Or we could go straight into pushing and pulling, which is going to work those rotator muscles and strengthen them even more now that you're moving the scapula along a expanded and strong foundation. It's the exact same thing for the spine. We can do that before going in through squats or hinges, deadlifts. If we can encourage this stacked position, then nearly all of our movements out in exercise and just as we walk around should improve because we've expanded with gas. We've got our guts moving. If our guts don't move, our spine won't move very well. All right. So just to recap on a few things, our breathing mechanics influence our ability to move around. We want to start with a full exhalation through the mouth to empty our lungs fully and stack our rib cage over our pelvis. Then we want to be able to maintain a stack as we inhale through our nose and expand our torso evenly. All of this comes with time when we When some areas have been compressed for a long period of time, this takes time for that to expand and respond. There are other things that will influence our spinal movement, and as I said before, that's what Phil will be going over in 2 weeks' time about the pelvis and how we interact with the floor, how our lower extremities move, how our feet move. All of that will have an influence on how our spine functions. Now, so make sure to come along to that in 2 weeks' time, and then a third one 2 weeks after that, where me and Phil will both be here going over strategies. So thank you all for coming today. If you do have any questions, just stay back, and I'm more than happy to answer anything that you have.